Adam and Ted, how do you have to approach game development differently when you're making a VR game as opposed to a traditional game?
No idea.
No? Oh, yeah.
we made Adrift 2D and VR in parallel, which I don't recommend to anyone doing. It's very hard. And, you know, my whole team has made AAA games for our whole careers, and, you know, there's a certain amount of things that you know just based on your experience and what you know works, and there's a lot of, like, you know, holy shit, I have no idea what I'm doing. And there's a lot of peering around in the dark, but when you find that, like, those things, it's like, it makes it all worth it. So, yeah, it's really hard to kind of, you know, actually answer that question, because it's so new.
Ted, you've been making games for a long time.
I'd say two things really stood out to us as being requiring a different approach. One was camera, because we've been making third-person action games for a long time, and we're used to approaching camera in a very specific way. And the second was space layout, because when you are working, at least in our case, in a third-person action game, where you allow the player to go affects the player's experience in VR. Because you're asking, for example, in traditional games, if it's a free-roaming open-world game, you're telling the player, we want the character to go forward and back and side to side, but because the camera is your head in VR, if you're asking the character to turn like this through an environment, you're asking the player generally to do this in their seat, and all of a sudden they start getting wrapped up.
Interesting.
And we learned that very early, that we had to create the illusion of that same freedom of space. I guess you can go anywhere in this space without creating those physical challenges when you're actually wearing a headset. And it took, as you remember, it took a lot of different approaches before we could get just simple moving across the screen correct, or coming back into the screen correct. But again, for us it was fun. It's that creative problem solving which is so exhilarating in game development, and having new problems like this to solve, I think really gets the team jazzed, because you feel like you really are doing things that very few other people have done before.
And that's going on in every game that's being made multiple times in multiple ways. We just had Gamer Day, and we were talking about all the games that were there, and one of the journalists I was speaking to said, okay, you keep saying this. What did that game do that's different? And I said, and he goes, okay, that game. Yeah, that game. Yeah, that game. Like literally, as you go down, I could point to something brilliant and new that had to be discovered to make the game that was being pointed at work in VR for every title until he gave up.
So just to satisfy my own curiosity, something like Lucky's Tale, a third-person platformer in VR, what was something that they learned that they had to approach differently?
There was a huge number of things that they learned, and actually because Lucky's Tale was so early, a lot of their education came back to the game developers that came after them, because they were before everybody else. You know, there was CCP, there was Lucky's Tale, and your game was very, very early. Adrift is very early. But the way the camera moves in that game, in Lucky's Tale, is nothing like what a Spyro or a Ratchet or a Jack or what any other free-roaming camera would have done. If you fall, the camera doesn't race down with you, it'll slowly follow you. The camera tends not to rotate around at all. The camera in that game is very mellow compared to a lot of other games. You'll never have the camera turn around and come backwards when you run backwards. It just doesn't do that, because that turn is when your body just is doing things that your inner ear isn't seeing, and it doesn't work. So the amount of camera work alone that went into Lucky's Tale was massive. And then I wish the developer were here, they could tell you 100 other things you did, but that comes through most clearly as what they did with the camera. And how they placed the level then had to be dictated by where the camera could and couldn't go. You can force cameras in Jack or any of the much more modern third-person character action game. If you want them to go in a hall, you just put the camera behind them and have it travel down the hall. So you can't do hallways at certain angles in Lucky's Tale because you can't rotate the camera to go down the hall. So the whole world is cognizant of how the new camera system works. It's fundamentally a massive challenge that they solved. So literally every title went through that, and the conversations back and forth with Oculus: is this working? Is this not working? It's just a lot of work, and a huge outcome for them.